que Patricia est avec vous?
Yes, she's over there.
Merci.
Period of film history known as the French New Wave or La Nouvelle Vague was undoubtedly an incredibly innovative time for the French film industry. The women of the New Wave quickly became icons of a new concept of what it meant to be a woman that would later evolve into second wave feminism. A survey of young people conducted by François Giraud for L'Express found that while male respondents remained loyal to a very traditional concept of gender, young women were intensely aware of living in an age of female emancipation, and of the contradictions between the opportunities this offered and the real constraints of marriage and motherhood. Where better for the youth to look for their modern heroines, dubbed Madamoiselle New Wave by André Caillat, than the cinema? It has been suggested, however, that French cinema of the New Wave period offers us a dreary succession of victim women, endlessly acted upon and gazed at. Jean-Luc Godard's 1960 film Breathless, and Agnes Varda's 1962 film Cleo from 5 to 7, both offer excellent examples of the modern woman of the time. Though both characters are portrayed as some form of victim with emphasis placed upon their looks, they are treated very differently by their respective creators. They fall victim to the wiles of the filmmaker and to a preconceived notion of who they are supposed to be. Let us begin with the character of Patricia in Godard's film Breathless. Filmmaker Jean-Luc Godard had a strong vision for who he wanted his characters to be and how he wanted them to be perceived. Patricia's character exists entirely for the benefit of the leading main character, Michel. Godard was part of the group of young men, mostly in their 20s, who wrote for the Cahiers du Cinéma and strongly believed in the idea of the auteur. Breathless was Godard's first full-length film and was incredibly successful. Whether Godard liked it or not, his film became one of the most iconic examples of the films of the New Wave and remains so to this day. So it doesn't seem like a stretch to take Breathless as a sort of case study for the majority of the film period. With a medium-like film, it is impossible to create anything that is completely impartial. The politics of the gaze is inherent as soon as we see a character on screen, and she is immediately subject to our own biases, which are largely influenced by that of the filmmaker. Who is seen, how they are seen, and what is deemed important enough to be seen is determined through the power of the filmmaker. The nature of the camera stylo in the New Wave was that largely male filmmakers created stories that focused on male protagonists that were stand-in for themselves. As such, all supporting characters tend to be defined by and revolve around the main character. Patricia, for example, is an iconic character in her own right. Due to a tight budget, Jean Seberg wore her own clothes and styled her hair as she normally would, and this look became iconic. Not only did she look iconic, but she is a working woman with a life of her own. But this life is somewhat put on hold with the arrival of Michel.
Tu aurais dû rester avec moi hier.
Je ne pouvais pas.
Tu pouvais très bien. Il n'y avait qu'à dire à ce type que tu ne pouvais pas le voir.
Mais il fallait que je le voie. Il va me faire écrire des articles. C'est très important pour moi, Michel.
Non, ce qui est important, c'est d'aller à Rome avec moi.
We are meant to believe that Patricia, at least in some way, is in love with Michel, but he treats her horribly. He verbally abuses her, constantly calling her a coward, and seems to value her entirely for her beauty.
J'aime une fille qui a une très jolie nuque, de très jolis seins, une très jolie voix, de très jolies poignets, un très joli front, de très jolis genoux. Mais qui est lâche.
C'est là, stop.
Attends, je vais me garer, quoi.
Non, c'est inutile.
Bon, fous le camp. Je ne veux plus te voir. Fous le camp. Fous le camp, dégueulasse.
Patricia at least has some agency. At the end of the film, she decides to stay in Paris and continue living her own life, rather than sacrifice it all to run off with Michel. Even this decision, however, seems to be for the benefit of Michel, rather than for Patricia. This adds a tragic end to his character and seems to almost punish Patricia for her choice.
Qu'est-ce qu'elle a dit?
Il a dit, vous êtes vraiment une dégueulasse.
Consider again this scene from Breathless. It became famous for the groundbreaking way in which it used editing, but let's focus instead on the dialogue.
J'aime une fille qui a une très jolie nuque, de très jolis seins, une très jolie voix, de très jolies poignets, un très joli front, de très jolis genoux. Mais qui est large.
Where other films might direct our attention with editing showing us each part of the body that Michel is talking about, Breathless shows what we're supposed to be focusing on through the dialogue. We don't necessarily see it in this shot, but we are told what is important and what to look for in future shots. Cleo from 5 to 7 also shows a focus on appearances, but in an entirely different way. As one of the only female filmmakers of the French New Wave, Agnes Varda shows us a unique view. Varda illustrates the way in which this focus on appearances affects women. Cleo is a semi-famous singer and has internalized this focus to the point where it grounds her entire sense of self-worth.
Minute, beau papillon. Être laide, c'est ça la mort. Tant que je suis belle, je suis vivante et 10 fois plus que les autres.
Even when Cleo manages to break away from what is expected of her, we see the way that this emphasis on appearance continues to affect her. Mirrors are everywhere, and we see from Cleo's perspective the way that people always seem to be staring at her. Cleo is completely robbed of human connection. At the beginning of the film, Cleo is dependent upon all those around her. But she cannot connect to any of these people as they value her only for what she is supposed to be, the ideal and perfect woman. In stark contrast to Godard, however, Varda presents this victimization as an issue and shows an alternative. We see this alternative way of being when Cleo goes to see her friend Dorothy. Dorothy is completely naked and posing for sculpture. She is using her appearance, but the focus is instead on the art form. The sculptors are focused completely on their art, and they expect nothing of Dorothy other than her time and the ability to recreate her form.
And she looks at her friend being exposed naked as a model, and she can see that the artist looks through the body of that woman. They don't look at her as a body, but as something they need to make a design, to make a piece of art. When I did it as a metaphor of feminism. Even though the film looks very feminine from the beginning to the end, for me it's a very feminist reflection of thought that the day women started to look for themselves, from that minute, 45 minutes, she looks at things and already she's changing. Something is changing.
It seems safe to say that there is definitely a sense of victimhood inherent in the female characters of the New Wave. In Godard's Breathless, we see the way in which this victimhood is created, with little regard to the character of Patricia beyond how her actions can affect the character of Michel. Varda's Cleo from 5 to 7 shows us how these female characters might be affected by and struggle with being the victim of expectation and the male gaze. Cleo is able to overcome this internalized victimhood and become her very own version of the Mademoiselle New Wave.